Hey everybody, welcome to the Three Nails podcast. I'm Vincent Mentz, the founder of Three Nails Information Security. Today I am joined by Ross Young, who is a CISO in residence at Team 8. Ross is well known for creating the OWASP TASM or Threat and Safeguard Matrix. We're joined also by Sam, who's the head of sales here at Three Nails. Give us some input if anything comes up. Ross, will you give us a little bit of background about yourself?
Yeah, it's a pleasure to meet you guys. So if anybody hasn't heard about me, my name's Ross Young. I've been in cybersecurity for going on 20 years. I first started really most of my career at the Central Intelligence Agency. I was there for 10 and a half years doing cyber. After that, I went to Capital One, where I was a segment CISO for them for about 2 years and spent the last 4 years as the CISO of Caterpillar Financial. So behind the large construction equipment, we had our own bank, our own insurance company. I led all the security efforts there. And most recently, I'm the CISO in residence at Team 8, which means I get to meet with hundreds of CISOs, hundreds of new companies, and then figure out what should we building in the Israeli startup scene. And so it's been a very fun venture to go and make a huge impact.
That's fantastic. I was actually unaware of the Israeli aspect. That's pretty amazing. Well, why don't you tell us a little about the matrix that you've developed and how to leverage it to maybe develop effective cybersecurity programs?
Sure, sure. So I'm going to share my screen. So hopefully everybody gets a chance to see that. And basically, this has all been open source to OWASP. So if you go to OWASP.org and you search the OWASP Threat and Safeguard Matrix, and I'm sure we'll have a link to it in our show, what you would see is a simple matrix that has the NIST 5 functions on the top. And so it says identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And then on the left hand side, going up and down, what you see are threats to your company. And so you can put in things like a web application attack or phishing or third party data loss. And the goal really is to say, hey, if these are the things that I think can cause material risk to my company, how do I spend a little bit of time and think about what are the safeguards in my company that are going to identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover to those? Essentially, I don't want it just a single one line risk in the risk register that says, oh, I'm just going to stop phishing attacks. You wouldn't go to war with somebody and put a one line in a risk register that says the US is going to stop war with Russia. You're actually going to have a defense in depth plan. And so that's exactly what we start to do with the metrics is if you go in, you can start to flesh things out. And so, for example, if you say, hey, I'm really worried about phishing attacks, you can go in and say, well, where would I identify who's likely to get phishing attacks? And what are all the communication tools in my company where people could be attacked? And then afterwards, how would I absolutely stop this from an automated protective way? Maybe things like a proof point to do email security solutions, or maybe before somebody clicks a link, it actually has to go out through a web proxy. All those things that could actually stop that egress. And then if you couldn't stop it, how would you detect something happen? Do you have an EDR or some other tool that logs things? And you go through this process. And what I find is by using this threat and safeguard matrix, companies can build a robust defense in depth plan against the largest material risk to their companies.
Okay, so based on this matrix, it goes from left to right here. Are there key steps at each of these columns here that you feel like should be highlighted if a new organization or an organization new to this wants to start leveraging this? Is there an intuitive step by step process you'd recommend sort of following here?
Yeah, so the first step that you want to do is this left-hand thing of filling out your top threats. So what I recommend CISOs do is when they come into their first job or their job in the first 90 days, they need to be meeting with lots of different stakeholders to figuring out what the key threats are to their organization. It might be fraud. It might be insider threat. It might be third-party supplier risk. Or it could just be, hey, you're a company that builds lots of mobile applications and nobody's done mobile app sec. Any of those things can be a key threat to your organization. And so it's talking to enough people to figure out what that is. And then once you figure out what each of those threats are that you want to put in here, and you can notice it's kind of subtle, but there's 3 dots. You can put as many as things as you like in here. Then that's when you actually want to start filling out, well, how would I identify who are the highest risks of people who would have insider access? If I was really worried about insider threats, and then how would I protect, detect, respond, and recover to those threats?
How do companies sort of prioritize what areas to focus on first? I mean, talking to different people is something you mentioned, but when it comes to identifying risks and threats of specific pieces of information being divulged, or applications being accessed, or whatever they define, like how can they prioritize those things?
Yeah, and I usually find there's 2 buckets that teams typically start out with. One is, what are all the legal requirements and compliance that I just have to do? These are the minimum baseline. And then the second thing is, what are all the things that are the highest likelihood to impact my company in a negative way? And 2 ways you can typically do this. One is you can just look at last year. What happened if we were to quantify all the big things that hurt us last year? High likelihood of those replaying again this year. And then the second thing is, what are, let's say, some current studies? So maybe you go to the Verizon data breach report and you start to say, well, what are all the biggest attacks here? Or maybe you're looking at, CISA's known exploitable vulnerabilities, and you're starting to see, well, how are the bad actors starting to pivot their tactics and maybe focus a little bit more on these new vulnerabilities or these other things that maybe we haven't focused enough on. So looking at latest, greatest attack trends, as well as what happened to you last year, you
Mm.
take those 2 things to kind of build your high likelihood of material threats, and then you overlay that across the matrix.
You may have just answered my next question, which is for organizations with a security program of sorts, how can they adapt to your threat matrix, and or be able to leverage it if they've got some form of program already in place? I guess does that make sense? I'm not sure if that question is very
Yeah.
helpful, but
Yeah, yeah. No, it makes perfect sense. And so once you kind of put everything here together, the next thing that you're going to see in this matrix is, okay, now I have all these words on all this matrix. Where do I focus? Where do I prioritize that? And what you'll see that I recommend is you just take a little red line and put a box around where you want to focus. Maybe last year you got your patch management in hand and everybody's patching under 30 days. Well, it shouldn't be a focus for this year because, maybe you have to focus on something else that's not at the level that you expect it to be. And so what you want to do is really cherry pick where in your program you want to move the needle. And so you'll just see, here's an example of things that maybe I highlighted from my time when I was a CISO, of here's where I wanted to focus in the next year or so. And then once you have these items that says, here's where I want to go, this is where the magic starts to happen. What I really like to do is build a uh, some type of measurement or metrics that's really going to take each of these and turn it tactical. So when I was, watching and exploiting a lot of places, I said, what are the highest likelihood of attacks? Well, it was, someone who had an internet facing server that was vulnerable. Okay, I'm going to focus on patching those. And that could be because maybe it's unpatched or maybe it's misconfigured. And so I call those vuln management and secure configurations. And then what's the second most common way, and maybe even the most common way, is, people clicking phishing attacks. Well, I want some metric around my phishing program. And then afterwards, I was really worried about third party supply chain security because I was starting to see open source libraries having malicious packages ingested into them for things like malware, remote access Trojans, or Bitcoin miners. And so you start to put those in. And when I start to say, well, what's a good metric? A good metric always has to start with a clear definition of what that is. And then you're going to have a number. So if you just look at this example here, you'll see it says Q4 2022, and you see the number 30. Well, I don't know if 30 is a good number or a bad number if I only have the number 30. I really need to have 2 things. One, I need to have a trend. If my patching was at 70 days and now I'm at 30 days, hey, that's really good. I've half the amount of time it takes to do vuln management. But the other piece, in addition to telling the trend, is also to know what's the goal when we want to celebrate success or this definition of done. And so, behind each of your numbers, if you want to build a very good metrics program, what you're going to do is you're going to look at the trends over a period of time, and you're going to look at the goals with the say, here's the number I need to achieve with the clear definitions of done. So that's how I like to take, each of these things to go from here's a top threat, here's all these items that can actually build my defense in depth plan. Here's how we're going to turn these into a clear metric, and how we're going to measure and report this back to our leadership team.
Ross, this is your first year at Teammate, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
How long can an organization expect or a CISO expect to take to be able to integrate this in an effective way, I guess? Yeah.
So a tool like this is usually going to take a year to 2 years. First of all, you have to get everybody bought on board that these are the 7 things or 10 things you're going to track as your metrics for this year. And that usually means you have to forecast it in your planning committee. So usually in organizations that I've been, right around this August through October timeframe is when everybody is planning their 2025 accomplishments, programs, resource spend, all of that. And this is what you're going to say, hey, in 2025, this is what we're going to focus on. Here's who's going to be held accountable. Here's how we're going to measure these things. And then you have to report on this on a monthly basis so people have enough time and enough feedback to pivot, right? Because at the beginning of the year, the metrics are going to look terrible. But by the end of the year, they should be moving towards those end goals of what you've announced, and you should be able to hold that accountability. And, maybe people's performance bonuses are even tied to these things just to try to make those incentives clear and motivating.
How should organizations set meaningful goals around those metrics? I mean, I think you gave us the delta, right, between like how long it took you to remediate patching between, Q3, Q4. But what are some goals that companies can set, I guess, surrounding, the matrix?
Yeah, I think it depends on every company, right? Because one company may be patching at 300 days and another company may already be patching at 60 days. So you have very different starting points of where you come into the matrix and focuses. And so you have to look at that to say, here's where we are. And the first thing you may want to do is try to look in some Gartner papers or other things to figure out what are the industry trends. So maybe if you're using Proofpoint as your email security solution, you can find these email scenarios where you're going to try to trick your users on these phishing attacks. And if they say, hey, the average scenario, uh, let's say click rate on this example is 7%. Well, maybe that's the target that you shoot for your organization. We just want to be a little bit better than the industry average. So maybe you shoot for 6%. But if you're already, under 5%, clearly that's a bad goal. You want to be moving the needle always in a little bit more of a positive direction.
Okay. You brought up phishing and those types of engagements. I'm curious, as a pen test company, right, we work closely with our clients to help them remediate their issues and validate that they're actually remediated. So that hits home for us. How can companies improve their remediation and patching efforts, leveraging the matrix? I'm thinking in the context of an offensive security company, maybe training or bringing this matrix to their knowledge, and helping and reinforcing them into sort of leveraging it for their benefit. How can us as a company, help our clients to actually leverage it successfully?
Yeah, so maybe the big focus isn't as much on, the phishing. Maybe you've got that under control and your real focus is on the remediation. Hey, when we identify red team findings or pen test findings, we don't want them to sit and linger for 180 days. We really want to get them resolved in under 30 days. So, maybe that's the metric that you put in there, that the average remediation time for any higher critical pen test or red team finding is less than 30 days. And then what you do is you track that. It could be in Jira, it could be in some tool that you have or some ticketing system. And you say, here's our open findings. And then what you do is you have something that says, here's the owners responsible for them, because maybe they all go to different development teams. And then after that, you're going to have something that says, here is their planned remediation date for this finding. Because even though your service level agreement is 30 days, maybe it takes 60 days because you got to work with a third party vendor to get something fixed. Or maybe they can patch it in 10 days, right?
Mm.
And so what you want to do is you want to have this metric, but you also want to have maybe one slide a little bit deeper where you have names, you have accountability, you have clear remediation timelines, and you say, if you really want to improve your numbers, here's the top 3 things I need you to focus on for next month. And then we're going to come back and discuss them.
Mm.
And then that really allows you to give clear, actionable feedback to the dev teams, to the CIOs, who can then, hold those people accountable through their management support chains to making sure that's happening.
Okay. Okay. And I'm seeing a couple different pages on your TASM page here on the OAuth website.
Yeah.
One sort of the functions and safeguards, matrix, and the next one is where you're defining metric types and definitions and things like that. And I don't know if you want to share screen. You don't need to, but is there like a template people can use for a PDF or something they can fill out and be able to just not have to manually do something like that?
Yeah. So one of the things that's really helpful, if you go to this, the OWASP threat and safeguard matrix, what you'll notice is there's this little hidden tab that maybe you might have skipped over at the top, says media. And in here, you can go in and you can download links to the slides, and then that'll give you some templates that you can use going forward there.
Beautiful. Awesome. Wow, that was that went a lot faster than I was expecting it to go. Ross, you also host a podcast called CISO Tradecraft. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that and some of the things you're talking about over there, and keep people's tongues wet and see if they might be able to transition off this and go check you out.
Yeah. So G. Mark Hardy and myself started a podcast about 4 years ago, and it's called CISO Tradecraft. Really, the focus of the whole show is how do we train the next generation of CISOs and help people up level their skills? And what we saw is there were people who are really technical. Imagine really, really good pen testers, but they've never led an AppSec program before. They've never actually done GRC before. So how do you cross train them in the other disciplines? How do you give them the communication, the leadership, the political skills to succeed? And how do you actually teach them how to run those programs so that they can, achieve their dreams of being a first-time CISO? So really that's the key. And it's not just for first-time CISOs. It can be from anybody looking to learn more about the cybersecurity industry or acting CISOs who are just trying to up-level their trade craft. So that's really the show in a nutshell. We have a LinkedIn page where you can read lots of good comments. There's a Substack if you like newsletters, and YouTube or podcasts. But highly encourage everybody, just Google CISO Tradecraft and you'll see it on any of your common providers.
What actually inspired you to make the podcast?
It started from as I was leaving Capital One, going to Caterpillar and being a first-time CISO. I had a lot of friends asking me about it. And, think of maybe they were just one step behind me, so about 3 to 5 years behind in their career, and I was mentoring them. And what I found was I kept repeating the same thing to like 5 different people. And I'm like, oh, I should just turn this into a podcast and I can mentor at scale. And so, that's what I did. And then afterwards, I'm like, oh, it shouldn't just be me doing it. I would, value getting somebody really smart. So I looked at who was the SANS professor essentially on that topic, who was G. Mark Hardy teaching the SANS leadership classes. So it's like, who better of a partner than the guy currently leading it? And so together we co-founded this and built it out. And then he's really been doing, the lion's share of the voices. I've had to step back in some other roles and not be as publicly speaking. And now I'm kind of coming back into the speaking scene again.
Ross, do you do any trainings or anything like that?
Yeah. So this is something we're really excited to announce. In 2025, we are going to build our own CISO tradecraft class, so people can take that. We've submitted a learning lab for RSA, so we're crossing our fingers. We're going to get selected for that. But if not, we're also going to have our own class that's going to be released later in 2025.
Wow, many blessings on that one. We'll be hoping for you, crossing our fingers with you. Awesome. Well, how should people contact you if they want to get in touch with you?
Yeah, so I would say the best way is to really get involved with me on LinkedIn. So if you go to LinkedIn and you search Ross, ROSS, Young, YOUNG, you'll find me. And that's a good thing, especially if you're an active CISO. As I mentioned earlier, I'm at Teammate, and what we do is we build this amazing portfolio or village of CISOs. So we do a lot of custom content, so monthly webinars with very, very cutting edge topics. There's a CISO Slack group to help CISOs. And if you're not a CISO today, but just really looking to learn, please just reach out to me on LinkedIn and just put a message about that. I'm happy to, help mentor. I often spend, 30 minutes and do a free mentoring session to help people or point people in the right direction of content to help to improve their careers.
Excellent. Awesome. Well, thank you, Ross, for joining the podcast today and taking some time out of your day. We really appreciate you joining the 3 Nails podcast. Yeah, maybe we'll be able to have more conversation in the future, and maybe next time you guys will be offering some training by that point. So, well, I guess through the channels you discussed, but we really appreciate you joining today, Ross.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure. And look, everybody needs good pen testing on red teams. So we're very thankful for services like yours that is going to go in and try to find those hidden threats inside a company that you don't realize that are there. And the last thing I'll just leave maybe as a nugget of wisdom is, while it's important to find the threats, it's more important to actually remediate the threats. So please, please, please make sure when you build your plans, you build how am I going to track all of these vulnerabilities? How am I going to replay these vulnerabilities? Because sometimes a developer says, "Oh yeah, I fixed it," and then you go and you double check that fix, and you're like, "It didn't really get fixed. We got to retry that fix again, man. I don't know what happened." And so please,
Yes.
please, please make sure you validate those fixes, because sometimes
Yes.
things aren't what people say they are from both the pen tester side as well as the developer side. So
Yeah.
absolutely, remediation is so much more critical than just finding the threats, and love what you guys are doing in the industry.
Thank you, Ross. Mic drop. We'll leave it there. Thanks, everybody, for joining the podcast today. Please get in touch with Ross. He's a wonderful person. So thanks again, Ross, for joining today, and we will see you guys on the next podcast. Thanks.
No problem. Have a wonderful day, everyone.